I tried to get Sergey to tell me what he would be playing tonight, and he told me that when he improvises, he really doesn't know what he's going to play until he sits down at the piano. I want to know exactly when the first decision happens, and what's driving that decision.
See, in the best case scenario, it's not a decision. You just play, like you sit down and like things start happening through you. And if you sit there, like I find that my best performances are where I have no idea what's going on, what's happening, which is why I'm always so grateful when it's on video that I can actually like enjoy it. But yeah, like the best state I feel is when you just relax and let things flow through you.
You were 5 years old in the Soviet Union, and you told your mother that you needed a piano, which I can totally imagine, by the way. Where did this idea come from? Where do you think?
I think actually it comes directly from God, in whom I believe. You know, and I totally think like God just came down from heavens and kissed this child and said, "You'll play piano." Because having never seen a piano or ever heard jazz, my mother tells me, and I have reason to believe her, I pestered her for a piano. She got me one, and I started like as a child playing like little jazz things, like trying to, improvise, find the keys that sounded like jazz to me at 5 years of age. So, see, I think it's a total gift. Of course, you have to like practice for sure, and you have to know when you have a tune, you have to know what the chord progression is, because otherwise, how could you improvise? You have to obviously follow a structure of chord progression. But for me, I just I walk around Harlem. I don't go like, oh, this is interesting. I go like, I remember this. I think in my past life, I was a jazz musician living in Harlem.
But eventually, ultimately, you didn't decide to pursue it as a profession. As my mother mentioned, you're usually on the other side of the interview. You have your own interview series, interview show. How did you sort of maintain that love for music, and how did you keep it such an integral part of your life once you made that decision that it wasn't going to be your career?
Well, you know how they say, like, just because I'm good in bed doesn't mean I have to make a profession out of it. Same thing I felt about dance, same thing I felt about music. It's just something that makes my life better, but it doesn't have to be the primary way in which I earn my living. So I earn my living as a journalist now. So, like, look, music is just a way to communicate to people. It's a way to share your energy, just like words are, just like dance is, just like, just sitting silently next to each other and sharing a drink. It's all energy. It's all, communication. So in which way you communicate, whether it be music, dance, or interview show, it doesn't really matter, ultimately.
And Moira, when you were 5 years old, your parents gave you a toy piano for your birthday, and from there on out, you fell in love with it. Do you think if it were a toy tuba or a violin, you would have eventually found your way to the piano?
Well, I love violin, but it needs to be played. It's very hard to play violin. So, the piano for 5 years old, I think it's the easiest instrument to approach, always to be very practical and realistic, because you have to push the keys so a sound comes out of it, rather a guitar or a violin or any other kind of instrument, even a saxophone. Maybe a flute, it's easier for a kid to play, but the piano was what they gave me, and as the first love, you just go with that.
Why do you think the piano suits your personality?
Because it's like an orchestra, so I'm mostly a composer, and I think for orchestra, and this very wide range allows us pianists to really explore different colors, and by color I mean dynamics, range, harmonic development. It's very interesting.
Wow.
So after you attended conservatory, when you started becoming interested in improvisation, basically at the time that meant jazz.
Yeah.
But you speak a lot about how there's actually a very long tradition of improvisation within classical piano.
Absolutely.
Where do you think where did that go? Where did it get lost?
So the problem is in academia. As you know, as always happens, something is beautiful and then becomes evil. And the same thing it happened I think with improvisation in classical music, because if we read the Western classical music history, we know that improvisation was part of classical music since the Gregorian chanting. Of course, the way to approach improvisation changes throughout the history. So for instance, for the Gregorian chanting, it was the ornamentation, and then later on there were musical forms developed, preludes, fantasies, toccatas, and then of course everybody knows about Mozart and Bach improvising, but there were really a lot of musical forms and composers who were improvising all the time. I think historically, something happened after the First World War, when everybody wanted to keep the tradition of, the nationalism. So everybody wanted to keep the tradition, and at the same time, the first players were around. So there was this misconception that the only version that we heard, it was the only one we had. Also, we have to remember that our composers, they didn't have a CD player, so the only way for them to notate the music, it was actually the paper. So unless it's an oral tradition, Western classical music mostly based on writing. So that's the way they were sharing the music. But at some point it got lost. It's also true that in the conservatory, maybe, at least in my experience, there is not enough joy for instructors to challenge themselves. Because if you want to teach improvisation to the students, you need to teach improvisation to yourself first. So it's a challenge, especially if you're used to read and play beautifully everything that is written down. I hope, that eventually things will change. For instance, Berkeley now is merging with the Boston Conservatory, so we're trying to actually bring both practice, the reading and the tradition and the improvisation side together.
And you have a workshop series that you founded specifically for classical pianists who want to learn improvisation. What do you find is their biggest struggle when they walk through the door?
Yeah, the reason why I founded the workshop, it's because I was one of them. So when I was 19, I could play, first ballad of Chopin, but I could not understand most of the music. And at that time, as you were mentioning, they told me that jazz was the only way to approach improvisation. But then, when I started discovering all the beautiful Western classical history, I decided to make all my struggle worth it for somebody else. So creating a method, an approach, I would say, that will allow classical pianists to approach improvisation in a much smoother way. Because when you study jazz, you do a lot of transcriptions, you do a lot of harmonic work. I did it and I love it, but it's a specific idiom. It sounds jazz. So I would like classical pianists to start from what is familiar to them, so a prelude by Chopin or an invention by Bach, and start, doing some work on that, so they feel less intimidated, hopefully.
They feel like they're crossing over to the dark side?
No, some of them actually are they amaze me. I was in Puerto Rico last week and I was working with the conservatory students. Wow, this 16-year-old kid we made from a nocturne by Chopin. I asked him to create an original version, so he kept the harmony and he created a dance, so based on a Puerto Rican rhythm, and created an original melody and start improvising on it. So I think they want to do it. They just don't have the tool and they don't have anybody who encourage them to do it.
What about you professionally? Was there any question ever whether you would pursue something else?
Maybe I love cooking, so probably I will be a cook.
Put that to use at the next Get Classical.
No, I think this is my lifetime. You know, in this lifetime, this is what I'm going to do. I'm not interested in anything else. And I think, you know, we have the opportunity to do this as a professional, you know, on a professional level, and I feel really blessed every day.
What do you listen to? What do you listen to?
A lot of classical Arabic music, actually, which I love very much, and a lot of classical music. Bach, it will be always my biggest love, and also a lot of jazz. Some of it, because the old one is great, and the contemporary, some pianists I really love, like Fred Hirsch or Brad Mehldau. I think they are very, very brilliant.
I heard in the piece where you incorporated pop music, which I think everybody here really enjoyed. We had "Toxic" by Britney Spears. We had some Nirvana, which
Come As You
Are, and the last one was "Bad Romance," I think.
Yes.
Are we gonna see a Bieber?
Yeah, I mean, you should ask to John, John Painter, probably, yes. No, but the idea is that really you can make classical sound anything, you know, like classical music is everywhere. And if you just want to really enjoy and have fun with it, you can play anything and make it a contemporary piece of music, you know, classical. It's amazing.